So, Joe, welcome to Quiet Excellence. Thanks so much for being with me.
Thank you, Taylor. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, you're chair of Vistage Group here in Seattle. And for those that don't know, tell us briefly, what is Vistage?
Well, it's a largest peer leadership group for executives in the world. Really, we're in 40 some odd countries now, and there's 46,000 members, I think, worldwide. So it's pretty big.
What is something most people get wrong about leadership?
Oof. I think it's hard to say because people run companies like these that I know have come to know. They read a lot and they learn a lot of things, and there's a lot out there nowadays. You know, Simon Sinek and Patrick Lencioni, a lot of these amazing authors that write about this stuff. James Clear. So they figured this stuff out in a lot of ways. But I think across the public, most people view leaders as people who just tell other people what to do. How often do we take, in a company, for example, take the best widget maker, make them head of the widget makers, right? Even though that's not their skill set at all. They were a good widget maker. So they can help people make widgets better, but they don't really know how to direct or manage or lead people. And I distinguish between leadership and management there very carefully, because I think that, you can be a decent manager by knowing when people are working and fixing schedules and those kinds of details and tactics. But to me, the leader is the one who actually inspires people to want to do the right thing, inspires people to feel like they know that they're going to get taken care of and they want to perform.
And I have more questions about that, but first, I think it'd be helpful. Tell me a little bit more about your background. I know briefly, I know the bios that I've read online, but tell me from your perspective, what is your background in leadership, both in the Navy and then maybe in the public or the private sector?
Yeah, that's an interesting story too. And my background, mostly Navy, active duty Navy.
Yeah.
I wanted to fly airplanes. My dad suggested the Navy had airplanes too, and I applied to the Naval Academy and got in, and that was really my focus throughout the early time. I became my eyes weren't good enough to be a pilot at the time, and I ended up being a naval flight officer. So the goose, the guy in the back. Generally. And that was, practically speaking, that became my trade early on. And that was a bombardier in the A6 Intruder. Spent better part of half of my career, probably 18, 20 years doing that stuff actively, a mix of things that aren't worth getting into. Eventually was fortunate enough to get to command a squadron of airplanes, which was about 300 people and a half dozen jets. And after that, the squadron did well. I won't credit myself with that, but they did well enough that the Navy said, "Well, we're gonna ask you to go through the nuclear power program because we want to consider you to be an aircraft carrier captain one of these days. You have to be an aviator and you have to be nuclear power trained, not weapons, to do that work." And that became the lion's share of the rest of my career. Towards the end, I was selected for Rear Admiral, did a tour in the Pentagon. I went to San Diego and did one last tour, basically training and certifying aircraft carrier strike groups, the ships and all the airplanes that went with the carrier before they would deploy, just like they still do. Um, and I enjoyed all of that, but what was significant, I suppose, in it and applies to later in life is I had basically 4 bites to the apple for command, right? I was fortunate, very fortunate in that regard. I didn't think I would like command that much, but I did. The airplane squadron, and then as part of that nuclear power training program, they gave me command of the deep draft command ship, the 6th Fleet command ship out of Gaeta, Italy, sort of as a training thing for me in many respects. And then I was fortunate enough to select for command, and I commanded the aircraft carrier John C. Stennis, mostly out of Bremerton. We deployed and did some shipyard availabilities there. And then again, I made Rear Admiral at the end, and my final command was the one I described. Had a staff out of San Diego when we would go aboard and certify those groups to deploy, that they knew what they were doing. So having those 4 chances at command for me was a very fortunate thing. Yeah, I think that's true, although it's probably less significant a statement anymore. There's a lot more people I think are going into space. But um, yeah, I'm sorry, I might have missed the question. What was the question?
Yeah, what does it take? What kind of attributes does it take, or what did you have to develop within yourself to be able to lead an organization with how many people aboard?
Well, my crew was about 3,200, and then when we got the air wing aboard and deployed, we had about 5,500
So you
people.
got that's like a small city.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
What did it take, or what did you have to develop?
I think a healthier dose of humility than I had. One of the things that I hear from the CEOs I work with now frequently is that they feel like they have an imposter syndrome. As they learn to share, and I find that's almost ubiquitous. Everybody has that, and I certainly had that. Um, I'd also learned through my Navy time that um, being pushed to do something you don't think you can do is a great thing, and it's a great confidence builder to take on something else you don't think you can do. So there's that. I think you have to have a great deal of technical expertise, certainly, but mostly I think it's, people talk about the servant leadership thing all the time these days. That's a significant part of the whole thing. And I think if I had to say one thing that I learned, particularly with the aircraft carrier, the third of those four chances to do that was that I just needed to be vulnerable. I had to delegate very well, and I had to be vulnerable and admit what I didn't know. Right. Because, you've got that many people. You have people who are absolute specialists in their field. I mean, nuclear engineers that, they've spent their career doing it. I went to some schooling for it, but it's not, I speak the language, but it's not my field.
Yeah.
Driving a ship, I didn't literally drive the ship, but I certainly had to be, cognizant and technically competent to do that. And understand all that machinery, absolutely. But it was really a matter of being vulnerable and being able to admit to even the youngest, newest of sailors that I don't really know what you do. And the inference there, I think, was pretty clear that I don't really know what you do, and I'm absolutely beholden to you to do it and do it right.
Yeah.
I mean, the stakes are monstrous.
Yeah.
So, and I think that article you're referring to, I kind of wrote that in there, and that's a revelation to me because I think I didn't really understand it completely at the time.
Yeah.
And having done some of the work that I do now with Vistage, it's becoming more clear exactly what it is that I was talking about, that I figured out.
So when you mention vulnerability, I think of somebody that's commanding a U.S. nuclear aircraft carriers, eating nails for breakfast. And is that true? And then my second question is, what does vulnerability mean to you? Because I think a lot of people mean a lot of different things when they talk about vulnerability.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't mean you walk around all the time talking about all the things that you don't know about,
Yeah.
but I think it's a willingness to admit to someone else that you don't have all the answers. You really don't. And I had this image in my head, even as late as when I had to be the number two person on, actually, it was the same ship coincidentally, but and the man that was the CEO at the time was a good friend, but he was always, put out a good air that he was in charge. He knew what was going on. He understood about everything. In reality, I think he figured out the vulnerability piece too.
Yeah.
But to me, it just reaffirmed even at that point that, you got to really put on a show that you know what's going on. And I really figured out that things went a lot better when I didn't worry about that.
Yeah. What do leaders miss out on if they don't think vulnerability is for them?
Well, people start to look at you for all of the answers, right? I mean, so people would come up to the bridge where I spent a lot of my time as a captain, especially during flight operations. I had 17 department heads, and they would come up they were like a train coming up the ladders to talk to me about whatever it is that's going on. And they'd come up and say something like, well, Captain, I got parts over here, and I got to fix this radar and that radar, and which one should I do first, And I said, in fact, I learned to just say, I could pick, but I don't want to do that. You know better than I do.
Yeah.
So, go do it, and then I suppose that leads a little bit into the delegation part of it. But, I don't know if I'm answering your question very well or not there, but, I'm just pushing them that I don't know the answer to all these things, and don't come to me all the time to get the answer. If you start to get that attitude, and I've seen people do it, where people feel like they have to go to you to get every decision made, that they'll stop making decisions on their own, right? If nothing else, they can sort of give up responsibility for having to make the decisions. Like, well, he told me.
Yeah.
So if it was wrong, it's his problem, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so in your work with CEOs, what have you found is the price of success? And then the reason I ask that is because I've been thinking a lot about my own work. I've been thinking about putting in, more hours, but then that means that I'm not investing in relationships with my family, with my wife or my son. I'm not investing in relationships with friends, or maybe it's hobbies, maybe it's exercise.
Yeah.
What have you found? Because you're coaching CEOs, they're at pretty high levels. What has been the price of success for them?
Well, I think frequently the case, and it's a work in progress for
Yeah.
them, right? And they're not necessarily all that long tenured in their work, right? But the price of success, I think there are a lot that feel like they have to be in everything, doing everything, at least setting the example. I hear that one a lot. I've got to set the example. I've got to be in doing this, that, and the other things. Like, I think at some point you have to not do that, because you don't really have a company then. You have a job.
Yeah.
If you can't walk away for a little while, and B, you're going to kill yourself, and that doesn't do anybody any good.
Yeah.
So I think that that's a problem. I think most of them do a pretty good job of being cognizant of that and trying to resist that. And I think it comes back. The word delegation comes to mind a lot to me when these kind of things come up, because people feel like delegating is, the joke used to be the 3 Ds of leadership. I think it was decide, delegate, and disappear, right? A cynical view of that, But the point is, to bring your people up, teach them what they need to know, make sure they know what they need to know, because you may not know how to teach them, and give them the responsibility, give them the reins, and knowing that you maybe have to take a risk that they may screw it up, and that's just something you have to risk. So I think that, too many of them, and there's actually a saying in Vistage that one of their sales points is people spend too much time working, in the business instead of on the business. You may have heard that before. And they feel like they're the best at what's going on, especially founders.
Right.
Feel like they're the best at what's going on. And if they don't do it, it may get done, but it's not going to get done very well. And so they constantly find ways to fill that bucket up, and there's nothing left. So we frequently talk about it, frequently comes up at the meetings as they learn to be vulnerable with each other about what their biggest fears are and concerns, and let some of their shields down to say, it really bothers me. I'm not spending any time with my kids, and the others usually will chime in and say, I got the same issue going on, and what are you trying to do to change that? We just went through in a retreat last weekend, some snippets of an interview that Vistage did with James Clear. He did the Atomic Habits book, and ways in which you can try to make deliberate habits in small ways each day to make a step in the direction of spending more time with your kids or whatever your goal is, So that's probably the thing that comes up more than anything. Is that factor. And then, of course, it's typical business kind of things, like they're frustrated because they're not making the kind of bottom line that they want to make, those typical, core business fundamentals. I'm got a ton of money coming in the door, and at the end of the month, I've got nothing, where's it all going kind of stuff, that comes up frequently too.
There's this book I recently read called How Will You Measure Your Life? And the author makes the case that people who are driven, people who want to succeed, they apply themselves in their work and they get really quick results, because you're looking at quarterly results, you're looking at quarterly earnings. When it comes to relationships with your kids or your spouse, you don't really see the payoff of that, right? That delayed gratification until, 10 years in the future, 15 years in the future. And so it can be so easy, even though it up here. I'm sure all the CEOs are aware that this is a tendency. We still do it.
Correct. You're right. And I think that's exactly what you're right. What you're saying is that, you can't measure that. It doesn't show up on your Apple Watch, time with kids or something. Although maybe it does. I don't know. And the point of taking little bitty steps in the right direction seems to be what comes up most often, just like that stuff. one of the things that I found through my career, particularly my Navy career, when I would see people that weren't Navy, especially if I'd been in for a long time, my kids were maybe in college, and they'd say, "Wow, that's a fascinating life story. You know how I could never do that to my kids, though. You know, I could never be gone. You were deployed. You know, you were in combat. You were doing other things.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I could never do that to my kids. You know, and I just had to say, you know, my kids are fine. My wife and I agonized over accepting that nuclear power program for the aircraft carrier thing because we knew it would be a lot of work. It was a lot of work.
Yeah.
It was a fair amount of time away from home. As it turned out, we had plenty of times we got to do some amazing things with the kids. We got to live in Italy.
Yeah.
You know, they get to live in Italy as teenagers, you know, and for example, and that was pretty phenomenal. They all think that's one of the best times of their lives. So in the end, I think it wasn't necessarily the quantity of time that we spent together, but we managed to spend quality time together, and they seemed none the worse for the wear. In fact, I might even argue that they're better off for it. You know, they moved a lot. They had to make friends quickly. They learned to deal with situations, you know, and they just get on with stuff. They don't worry about it.
Yeah, and I could imagine, I could see a case where it had this focusing effect, where you realize, okay, I only have this much time. So when I'm with my kids, I'm not going to be looking at my phone. I'm not going to be, you know, doing whatever else we could do. So I think there's this tendency to, yeah, you're in the same room as people, but are you actually in relationship with them? Are you actually intentionally 100% there with them?
I think that's true, Taylor. I do. Yeah.
In your work with CEOs, what's the one thing, because you have an interesting bird's eye view of a lot of different CEOs, you can start to see patterns. What's the one thing, if there is one thing, a commonality that comes up where if you could help them with this one thing, they'd be better off?
Yeah. It's probably the delegation piece and the not getting after every little thing that, yes, you can do it best, you can do it fastest for now. Because many of them just complain that I'm just constantly bogged down, and it comes up over and over. We talk about it. They say, yes, I need to do that. I need to do that.
Yeah.
And then, you know, 2 months down the road, it's the same thing going on
Yeah.
because they just can't bring themselves to do it. And it's kind of like a metaphor of like you water skiing or something, you know, if they could just find a way to plane out.
Yeah.
Right. And I get it too. You know, these are complex issues. And if you're in a 5-10 person company, you know, yeah, maybe everybody's got to roll their sleeves up at that point in the life of the company. But, you know, the typical small, mid-sized company that's, say, maybe 10 million in revenue or something like that with 30 people or 50 people, you know, somebody in my book, and I think they all agree, somebody has to be planed out and looking at what's going on, right? We used to, on the aircraft carrier, we used to have take distinguished visitors to see once. So that was the term for DVs. It seemed like a pain at the time, but it was important. They were educators and you know, business leaders and community leaders, and they would come out overnight. It was actually great fun for them, and it really was eye-opening for them. And they would see the young sailors doing these amazing things at 20 years old or 22 years old. You know, how do you get them to do that? Well, you empower them. You're vulnerable with them. You let them know that, hey, you're here, you're doing this, you're watching this, and going to push that if that, you know. Yeah. And if you screw it up, there are lives at stake, maybe even yours. Yeah. You know. And they forgot to do it. So that's fascinating to them. And then they would come up too, and they would watch me on the bridge a little bit, and they would talk to them in between flight ops and whatnot. And they would say, well, what do you do all day? And, you know, honestly, one time I answered, I think, the right way. I looked at the gentleman and I said, you know, I think if I'm doing my job right, I don't do anything, right? That's not really quite right. But, you know, I don't actively do it. There's no chore that I need to do other than maybe sign some things, you know. And I think that's true for those CEOs. In the ideal world, there's somebody, preferably them, who's just planed out, watching what's going on, paying attention to the future, paying attention to what the vision is, looking at KPIs, making adjustments to their processes, you know, creating the culture that they want to have, living the culture, exemplifying the culture they want to have. And that's very difficult to do when you're face down writing RFPs yourself, right, or proposals yourself. Oversimplified.
How can you, because I've noticed when I work on the business instead of in the business, in my own business, it can feel like I'm not doing something that's productive. Whereas if I'm working in the business, it feels like I'm making progress, or it feels like I'm moving in the, there's momentum.
Oh,
Whereas
right.
if I'm doing strategic thinking, it's like, oh, I'll come in for lunch and my wife asks me, what did you do? It's like, well, I sat there and I thought about things, even though that might be the best use of my time.
Sure.
How can you get over that idea of, okay, I'm not really doing anything, when that could be the best thing for you to be doing?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess you just have to figure it out. I mean, it's look, I'm a single shingle guy now, right? And you
Yeah.
go from having 5,000
Yeah.
and a staff, somebody making lunch for you,
Mm-hmm.
to ham fisting your own PowerPoint and
Yeah.
that kind of thing. So that's different, I guess,
Yeah.
in that regard. But I think when you have a group of people in a leadership role like that, it's incredibly important. It's not that you have to spend every minute of every day doing it, but you're I guess in the worst sense, their companies kind of become rudderless because they're doing, the adage, the urgent, but
Yeah.
not the important, right?
Yeah.
And you're spending almost all your time doing the urgent because there's always urgent
Yeah.
going on. I'm not throwing stones at them. It's absolutely hard.
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered your question there or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things you wrote in that article I referenced earlier is, I remember waking up on the carrier thinking, I don't want to be the boss today. I just want to crawl back in bed. And it makes me think of Marcus Aurelius in his Meditations, this journal that he never expected to be published, that
Okay.
has gone on to be published. And he was this Roman emperor, philosopher, king, and he wrote about how, writing to himself, you want to stay under the covers where it's warm, where it's safe. And so here's this, commander of a nuclear
Yeah.
power, nuclear
Carrier.
and a Roman emperor that is struggling with the same thing. And so I'm glad it's not just me. What do we do in those situations where we don't want to wake up? We don't want to be the boss today.
Well, look, you don't have to on some level, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that's your job.
Yeah.
You got to get up. You got to do it. People expect you to do it.
Yeah.
If they know you really want to just stay in bed, well, that's maybe not a good thing to be,
Yeah.
putting out. But, there's a process we talk about a great deal in the groups that I'm running here, the Vistage groups, which has to do with, many people know this stuff, this science, this brain science, the amygdala stuff.
Yeah.
Where we're hardwired from millennia of existing in the wild,
Yeah.
with many dangers around, to have this response to stimuli which is negative, right? And so caveman days, you see a tree rustles on the edge of the forest and you start running. You don't think about it, right? And that's great if it's a tiger.
Right.
Probably not a tiger nowadays.
Yes.
Right. So, and the whole point of this process is that you learn that, first of all, you understand that that's hardwired. That's physiological, and there's proof of that.
Yeah.
And there's a number of manifestations of that aren't quite as obvious as the tiger thing. But and it's a process you go through, and there's some meditation involved if you really get into this program of learning to recognize that when a stimuli happens to create a negative response, and then you can direct it to the rest of your brain, which in this program they refer to as the sage powers, things like empathy and curiosity and the one they call navigation, in relative importance. Transport yourself to your deathbed looking back at this. Is it really that big a deal? And I'm probably overdoing that discussion there a little bit, but if you're laying in the bed and realizing, I got to get up and get after some things, although my reaction right now to the alarm clock is, oh, I'm tired of making decisions. I'm really worried about making a wrong decision. All those negative stimuli that come in and cause a negative response, that you learn to intercept that. Now, the sad fact, Taylor, is that I hadn't been through this program at that point, and I didn't have the benefit of that knowledge. The things you learn at 60 that you really should know at 30. But I think that's how you have to deal with those kind of things: is learn how to get in your own head and figure out what's just an amygdala reaction that you can overcome and drag more to something that's a positive, push rather than a pull rather than a push thing.
Yeah. What does that look like in action, either for yourself or maybe for the people that you're working with?
Well, I think, sure, some CEO maybe wrestling with his, numbers or something, or her numbers, and somebody comes in and says, hey, our best person just quit, and you have to, the reaction would normally be, I can't believe I'm taking another body blow, and rather than go down there, because most of those responses don't help, they create stress in
Yeah.
you. There's nothing you can do about it,
Right.
probably. And you have to try and figure out a more positive response to it. So, instead of letting that get you down, spend the rest of the day wallowing in the woe is me, you learn that that's the response that's happening. It's not unreal, but it's an opportunity for me to say, okay, how can I create or turn this into a gift or opportunity? And almost anything that happens to humans, I'm a believer, you can turn that negative thing into a gift or opportunity if you have the right mindset about it. So it's a lot of words to say. I think mindset's important. If you're feeling bad, find a way to intercept that. And it's worse if it manifests, and then you're being that way can create the same response in other people.
Yeah.
Right. So, and vice versa. If you can have a sage response, as they would refer to it as, then that elicits the same response in other people. They call these things mirror neurons, and I kind of believe that this stuff is true.
Yeah.
So not to get too woo woo on you.
No, and I think if I walk in and shake your hand, it's like, hey Joe.
Sure.
Or if I come in with a smile and I look you in the eye
Sure,
and shake your hand,
absolutely.
it creates a certain energy between us.
Absolutely. And I think that's a game I played on the ship a lot.
Yeah.
With that many people, if I walked into a random shop somewhere, there are 2,000 some odd spaces on that ship, 2,000 rooms.
Yeah.
And you got, young Seaman Sally or Timmy from Lansing, Michigan or something down there.
Right.
And, they've had a kind of a tough day, or they got a rough letter from their family or something. And you walk in there and you're kind of cranky because something, bothered you too. That's not good. Now everybody's in that same boat. You can absolutely make their day by coming in with a really positive attitude, whether you're really feeling it or not when you got out of bed.
Yeah.
Really positive attitude, and hopefully a genuinely positive attitude, and really make their day. Of course, you can also, if you come in and you kick them when they're down,
Yeah.
you will ruin them. You may make them get out of the Navy, in one 20-second interaction. Yeah.
One of the things I've been thinking about is I think knowledge can be learned, whereas wisdom is like lived knowledge. It has to be lived in order to really sink in. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's how I'm thinking about it. Let's work with that definition. What is something that you have learned that has become wisdom for you that you've had to experience or go through in order for you to really internalize it?
Yeah, the vulnerability piece, definitely.
Okay.
I grew up in a world where, naval aviation was a tough guy's thing. It was a guy's thing only when I was young. It wasn't cool to admit that you didn't know what's going on or you were scared of something, right?
Yeah.
So you put on this armor all the time. So there's a wisdom around that. I think understanding that that's not true, that it's actually the cool thing to do to show some vulnerability. And again, I'm not talking about, wearing every failing you've ever had on your sleeve, but understanding that you can admit that you're not on top of everything. You need some help. That's probably wisdom. On the other hand, I had to say too that leadership stuff I think can be learned. You know what I mean? Of course, there's 100 books out there, 1,000 books out there on it, and you pick one up anytime. And there's some great stuff in them, that can help you. Right from my first year at the Naval Academy, first semester, plebe 101, leadership 101, plebe year, was, can you learn leadership? I remember a Marine major standing up in the front of the room, instructor, can you learn leadership? And I'm thinking, no, you're either born that way or you're not. God, I hope I'm born that way. Otherwise it's gonna be a long, ugly time. And nothing can be further. That's absolutely correct. I think you can learn leadership. I think we all do. Because, at its root, how do most people learn leadership? Well, they watch the leaders they have, and they kind of watch the ones that are doing stuff that seems to work well, and say, okay, I'm gonna stick that in this bag. And the bad leaders, they do bad stuff. I'll put that in this bag, and eventually you get a pretty good bag of stuff for ways to deal with. So I do think there's something to the knowledge. It doesn't all have to be wisdom or any natural inclination to be a leader. I think some people are just, their persona may be more that way. I saw a Simon Sinek thing the other day where he said, some of the best leaders I've seen don't look like leaders. They're the quietest people. They may not be in the role. And some of the worst leaders I've seen are people that are running big companies, huge companies, and they're horrible leaders, reality. Nobody looks to them for leadership. They may do what they say based on their authority, but nobody's really being led by them. They're being led by others, Definitely true in the Navy, my Navy days. Plenty of people, they'll do what you say by authority. They'll jump, but when you're not around to say something, they're not doing it, because they don't trust you, they don't respect you,
I think people want to be a leader that other people choose to follow. And we've all had people that are, leaders or they're in charge where we have to follow what they say. But I think the true and effective leaders are the ones where you want to follow them. You want to follow their leadership because you respect them and you trust them.
Yeah. I think, first of all, I kind of I was alluding to it in the last thing I said, but you want people that are going, they're going to look at you and they're going to say, okay, I see what this person thinks. I know that they're it's almost an overused term these days, but I think it's a great term, servant leader.
Yeah.
That this leader I have, really cares most of all about me succeeding.
Yeah.
And knows that my success will be his or her success. And, and that works well. And now they feel like, they're going to be supported in the decisions that they make. They're going to make decisions in your absence. They're along the lines of whatever you've tried to communicate to them, or whatever they've understood or what you communicated. So there's that servant leader aspect to it, certainly, that allows them to feel inspired and motivated to, row in the same direction. And of course, that can go horribly wrong if you're the opposite of that. If you're, and I think I'm stealing this quote from Sinek again, but if you're, if you're the person that cares more about them serving your bottom line than you feel you need to serve their betterment, then you've got problems.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, not sure I answered that question or not. But.
Yeah. It was pretty funny in 2020 when, companies started talking about uncertain times. And then it just kind of became this, I'd laugh every time I saw it because all times are uncertain.
Right.
So what can leaders do? Because I think, we have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. We're in control of very, very little when we're honest with ourselves. How can leaders or CEOs prepare for uncertainty? Because I think uncertainty is just an aspect of being live.
Yeah. Well, I think you have to sharpen the saw. You got to try and learn your trade, your leadership, whatever it is, as best you can. But I think you have to do, ultimately.
Yeah.
And a lot of CEOs I'm working with now that are firm believers that speed is monstrous these days because change happens so fast. Look what's going on with AI these days, and people don't even know which way to look. So speed is important, but I think you have to do. We were kind of almost talking about it earlier about kids coming out of college, right?
Yeah.
It's like they think, it's like I got to sit here and wring my hands and figure out the perfect vector for me to get on. It's like, no, you need to go get a job in the real world and start working and figuring things out. And if something's not working, change it, change the vector. So I feel like that's what leaders need to be willing to do. It's hard. Nobody likes change. We talk about that one all the time in the groups. It's like, my people don't want to. They want to just come in, do a step, eat a treat, do a step, eat a treat, it's like, but that's not the world we live in right now, especially in some industries where they've got to be ready to change constantly. So I don't know, I think that's the biggest thing is to, hone yourself, be a good leader, convince your people that you care about them and that, their success is what really the only thing that truly matters to you because you're certain that if they succeed, you succeed. And then take action.
How can leaders prepare their employees for an ever-changing future where it strikes me that there are some jobs where the way you do it today is going to be the way you do it in 30 years. But I think probably the majority of jobs are going to look so different in 30 years, so different in 10 years or 5 years. How can CEOs, leaders develop that growth mindset or almost an entrepreneurial mindset in the people that they are in charge of?
I think part of it's the way you react, right? Because the leaders are not, they're sensitive to these things too. And leaders really don't like change either. most don't. Few do. But, I think you have to prove to them that you're willing to make corrections. When things change and you are zeroed in on A and you get halfway there and A is not there anymore and you go, okay, we're going to B. Yeah. And come on, let's go. And here's the direction. I'm making some decisions where I have to. You put out clear, intent to make that change, and you make that change. You're stepping in the right direction always. It makes it a little easier. So good communication is a monstrous part of that, I think. There's a corollary, I suppose. Some argue and say that, it's absolutely exhausting to try and follow a leader that's constantly, doing a full right, full left rudder, Yeah. But if that's what's necessary, then they just understand it and get on with it.
In your work with CEOs and leaders, what has surprised you?
That's a good one. A level of optimism that I maybe frankly don't really have, if I'm honest, that you have somebody that started their company and they're doing okay with it, even knowing that, what is the statistics, like 19 out of 20 companies start up that they fail within 5 years or whatever the heck it is, but most of them just have this wide-eyed optimism that, I know, but I'm going to be the one, It's just that's kind of an entrepreneurial spirit, I guess, that I'm a little more nervous Nelly than that. Probably, if I'm honest, biggest risk I took was, I've got a pension, but I'm going to start a Vistage group, That's not much of a risk really, I suppose. But again.
I was reading, can't remember where I read this, but essentially every decision that you've made that's worthwhile is on the other side of fear. And so this idea that, we can live a life that's safe and we've gotten to this certain point, and anything worthwhile, anything that you've done, whether it's having kids or taking that job or doing this career choice, there was always fear. You had to get through that fear to the other side.
Yeah.
What is a way that we can be more comfortable with risk? Or because I think we can intellectualize it. We can say, everything is on the other side of fear. Okay, great. But there's still going to be that fear. There's still going to be that sense of risk. How can we get better at risk, or at least acknowledge it and say, hello, risk, there you are. I'm going to move forward anyway.
Yeah. That's a tough one, I think. I mentioned earlier that, during my Navy time, I didn't think I would be a natural, I still don't think I'm a natural leader, but, figuring out, okay, it'll be okay. We'll actually graduate someday. I thought 1981 would never come. Yeah. I graduated. I was going to flight school, and I don't know if I'm going to make it through this or not. And just the beautiful thing about the Navy life to me was it pushed me to do things that I was uncomfortable with. Because everything looked very difficult. I can remember watching the captain of USS America. He's long dead now, sadly, and that ship is on the bottom of the ocean. They sunk it at some point, and he's doing a change of command, and he's standing up on the stage on the hangar bay talking to God knows how many thousands of people, the whole crew, and all these guests, and pretty powerful guests are there, and admirals everywhere, and he gets up and does this thing like it's nothing, and it really isn't much, the reality, having been on the other side now, but and does this speech, I remember sitting there thinking to myself, I've been in for a couple of years, maybe 3 years, and thinking, I can never do that. Never, ever, ever, ever. It's no big deal because I'll never get there anyway. So there's always push to do the thing I didn't want to do. And the scariest thing was the nuclear power program. There might have been others, but combat missions, in the Libya strike in 1986, Desert Storm, there's no flight. Anyway, so there's some combat times that was in a shorter time frame. You do because that's what you do. That's your work, But, the big picture, taking on that kind of leadership role seemed unfathomable to me. In fact, I started to say, just like we were talking about earlier, it's like, I can't do that to the kids, honey. What do you think? I don't know. It's going to be, 8 years of sea duty. It seemed like, not quite right, really. But, and she said, maybe if you look at it from a different perspective, maybe you'll be showing the kids what it's like to do something that's kind of big and important and a little bit scary. Yeah. She was actually probably more supportive of the idea than I was, and she was exactly right. You know, it turned out to be the most amazing thing I've ever done. Um, so I may be off your original question, but the notion that you get pushed to do something that's kind of scary is, I think, great, and it's what convinced me that it's okay to do something scary. I retired from the Navy in 2015 and went to work for a little engineering software company, really. But we were control systems to run huge battery systems in utility substations and help the electrical grid in a whole number of ways. And I was a kind of a junior ranger engineer. As a nuclear guy, I was overly confident that I could do anything at this point because of all those times I was pushed. That was just a horrible idea. It was just a bad fit, so I had to go on and do something different. Anyway, I'm rambling there a little bit.
What was that like to reinvent yourself? Because you were how old when you got out?
Yeah, 55, I guess, almost 56. Maybe I was 56 by the time I actually retired.
Yeah, so 56, most people are, at the very tail end of their career, or maybe they're, retiring at that point. And then here you are, you totally reinvent yourself. What was that process like for you?
Yeah, it was exciting, right, to have something different happen. We moved 18 times. So we, it's like, honey, we can pick a place and just live there, So that was kind of exciting, but it was also pretty scary. They give you some training courses as a senior officer okay, you're going out in the world, you probably want to do some more work. You don't, Navy took good care of me. The taxpayers still give me a pension, which is lovely. Not many people get that these days. I'm eternally grateful for that. But you're not going to get rich either. So I felt like I want to do some more work and maybe a little more stable future. And so I decided, well, I'm going to go find a company and work for it. I don't have to make a whole lot of money, but I want to make some, and I want to do something. It's too much of life left. So yeah, I spent 6 months mooching off my brother-in-law, living in their house in Napa and doing some other things and figuring out the other side of life where you don't get a set of orders every 2 or 3 years. You go talk to 100,000 people and hopefully somebody decides that you might be worth something to them and you get hired. It was the first time in my life I ever, didn't get, I didn't know where my next paycheck was coming from necessarily. I mean, I knew the pension, but I didn't know where the next paycheck was coming from. So that was a little bit terrifying, it really was. And going in to talk to people and they go, well, this is a fascinating resume. You've done some amazing things, but, I don't really see what you do for us. And anyway, let's circle back someday. Good luck, and you go, well, wait a minute. Did you read that? I mean, I'm me. I can do a lot. I'm a big deal. Don't you understand? My wife jokes that I would get up on my first day of retirement and stand up and go, well, now who is going to cut my fruit? Yeah. So that was terrifying to me. But, I did do the little company for a while. I had the loyalty of a military person and, I did it for a couple of years. I probably shouldn't have. They got bought by a huge Korean firm, which was way less fun. It's great for the owners, but anyway, and then, the short story there is probably worth acknowledging is that I realized I need to find something else because again, it's not quite ready to be done. Don't need a lot, but I want to do something else. What do I have that I can leverage? And I had gotten a business master's along the way. I kind of spoke the language. I certainly knew people and leadership. I had a little bit of imposter syndrome because I wasn't much of a P&L kind of guy. But I bumped into a guy that ran a QFC grocery chain here for decades, and he was Vistage Chair. And I said, he talked to me. He said, I don't know in the energy industry, but, let me tell you what I do because you might be good at it. Yeah. And he took me to one of his meetings, the CEO group, and I was absolutely enthralled with it. It was absolutely amazing. It reminded me of the days when I ran the air wing training, kind of advanced air wing training before the air wings would join the ships and deploy. So the different airplane types would come together in Fallon, Nevada. And we would do these huge exercises where, you'd brief it, you'd plan it, you'd brief it, you'd go out on the range. with real bad guy airplanes and missile systems and all these different support airplanes, choreographed this ballet to put a few bombs in the bad guy's target, fake target. And then we come back and having done all that, and you would gather again in these huge theaters down in Fallon, and it wasn't very fancy video in those days, kind of a stroke kind of a video, but we would replay the whole thing. They had every airplane, every system was tracked and recorded, and replay the whole thing for this room full of big ego fighter pilots, but they check that ego at the door. Yeah. They come in, and the door closes, and we're not pulling any punches here. We're gonna figure out where we went wrong, and we're gonna make it better. Everybody's gonna leave here better. That's hard for people like that, right? To admit, to be forced to admit, to be proven that they might have messed something up in front of their fellow big egos. And by the way, to all my fighter pilot friends, I don't mean that as a pejorative. So to me, the Vistage group seemed like the same kind of a thing, so it was energizing to me. And I thought, darn it, I'm going to give that a try. And it's been a wonderful thing. I'm ever grateful to Mike. Sadly, we lost him a couple of years ago to cancer, and I'm ever indebted to him for, seeing that and then providing that opportunity for me to do some of this work. It's incredibly gratifying for me. And I think it's incredibly helpful for the people that are brave enough to do this kind of a group. I think that all people running companies should be doing this, but I drink my own bathwater, yeah.
What's most surprising for the people that do join the Vistage group? They're in the group, and what is an unexpected benefit that they get out of it?
I don't know that a lot of them probably don't really. They may know that it's a good idea, and they have some respected friend that's doing it, a colleague that's doing it, and they say, "Hey, that's a great idea. You should go do that." And they think, "Okay, I'll give it a try." I think they're stunned to come in and see the vulnerability and the willingness to share in the group that's existed already. And maybe they've been together for 3 or 4 years already. They know each other well. And they come in and they sit in that first meeting expecting it to be a kind of a business country club thing or something. You come in and you talk about the stock market and the economy or something, and the best book you read, or something. And they find out that somebody comes in and they're saying, I just don't know if I can do this anymore. I don't know if I have the energy for this, or, and my wife's going to leave me, because I've got a problem with my husband at home. I mean, some of the personal side of things that factor into their business lives that they can't talk about with anybody else. Or, hey, things haven't been that great for us lately, and I'm going to have to lay some people off, I think. I don't know, but I'm going to think, and they have nobody else they can talk to about that, right? So they can come in and talk to these other people that can lay bare their soul in a way that they can't anywhere else, and get some really meaningful feedback. If nothing else, some feedback that they're not alone in that fear or that reality that it's hard, yeah. Groups that have been together for quite a while, they get very close, and they get a great deal of benefit. And so once somebody sees that, they go, I get it. And they also realize that I need to be vulnerable like that to get that benefit out of it.
Yeah, this isn't just networking. It's not a business group. It's something a lot more.
Right. And there are a lot of groups that I don't mean to besmirch them. There's value in networking. There's value in standing with a glass of wine and a plate of poo-poos, meeting new people, right? I mean, that happens a lot. That's really not what Vistage is about. Vistage is about, this cohort it's not a cohort either, because it goes on, It's not a degree program. It's just, we meet once a month. I talk with them once a month, and we go on retreat once a year.
For people that may not join Vistage, but they want more vulnerability in their life, or maybe from other people, they want to emulate something like that. How can they do that? Or what would be the first step for somebody like that?
Well, if I'm, as a real Vistage champion, I should say there isn't any other way. Yeah. I think, I don't know, people get out of personal coaches, that kind of thing. That can be very helpful. I think a personal coach is tremendously helpful, maybe particularly even if they have a certain expertise that aligns with your company. Great value. But I don't think they get quite the, you get one opinion, one person's opinion, as opposed to 14 or 15. Yeah. And there's a certain critical mass of outside perspectives that you get in a Vistage meeting. I think it's very hard to get elsewhere. That's not to say I'm sure there are, credible similar programs out there, and I'm sure they can work fine. Yeah. Did I answer that?
Yeah. What are some red flags or alarm bells that you've seen with CEOs that are talking about their business? What are some precursors to those things that maybe are going wrong? How can we anticipate things that may go wrong or don't go as planned?
Oh boy. Well, it's one that's come up lately, I think, and that's you tend to think that people that run companies, small mid-sized companies, understand things like their numbers. This is kind of a tactical thing, a nuts and bolts thing, but and I'm coming to find out I'm no whiz kid with it either. I kind of speak the language. I know what a balance sheet is, income statement stuff, but and it's not to suggest that they have to know exactly all the details there. They have people for that generally. But I found that they don't always understand that stuff very well. They have people that they're trusting to do that kind of stuff and tell them what's going on that aren't telling them, either because they don't know themselves or they're afraid to tell them. And I think that there are some CEOs too that are they don't even want to look. They have a sense that it's not that great and they don't even want to look. That's a negative, I guess. Some others get over controlling with their folks. I think that comes up frequently enough. Some others that lose sight of the vision bit, the strategy. They don't really have it nailed down, and they kind of have this loosey-goosey, the kind of the vision, purpose, mission, purpose, vision kind of stuff that they don't pay enough attention to, and they don't communicate it well enough, and they don't revisit it often enough. One of the things that we do in my groups is that once a year I have them brief each other on their goals for the coming year and grade their goals from the previous year. It's we can't only afford to spend so much time on it, but it's a chance to talk to what your vision and your strategy for getting there is once a year with your folks. Just a very brief, not a lot of time. They get to see your stuff. They take a few things from it, that kind of thing. So I'd say that's a third area that I see many of them maybe not be all that sharp with, that they need help with.
Yeah, I would imagine when you're aboard the carrier that if you're on a mission somewhere, you know what the mission is.
Yeah.
And everybody else aboard the ship, they know what the mission is. But sometimes in companies, the leader doesn't really know what the mission is, and the employees certainly don't know what the mission is. And how can you accomplish the mission if you don't know what it is?
Right. I should say, I don't want to make it sound like, the Navy experience I had is a perfect, template for business.
Yeah.
I have tremendous respect for people who run small, mid-sized companies.
Yeah.
They don't have nearly the number of people.
Yeah.
They have nearly the number of communication headaches trying to go from 17 levels above down to the seaman on the deck plate. But they have a blank slate in terms of, especially if they're a founder.
Yeah.
And they only, it's like, what are you going to do? What are you trying to do?
Which is almost more paralyzing in some situations.
Right. Because if you don't know, I guarantee you these folks don't know, and they're never going to get there.
Yeah.
Right. If you don't know it and you don't communicate it, and revisit it and analyze it. I forgot what the question is. I'm sorry.
I think that's one of the things that we tell young people that it can be more harmful than helpful to say, oh, you can do anything.
Yeah.
It's like, well, that's a lot.
Oh, you mean like kids going through school stuff?
Yeah. It's like, oh, you can do anything you set your mind to. It's like, maybe we say, here's some things you really have some ability at. For me, it's like, okay, I'm never going to be a mathematician. I'm never going to be a scientist. Those things are out for me. And I find that to be much more helpful than it is a bad thing. I'd rather know, okay, here are your strengths, here are your weaknesses.
Right.
Don't go into a career that,
Right.
it relies on you being good at your weaknesses.
Or maybe college isn't even the right thing for you.
Yeah.
Not that you're stupid,
Right.
it's that, it's not worth the money and you're not
Exactly.
focused enough on any particular thing.
Yeah.
Maybe it's smarter for you to go become an electrician or something, or make more money even.
Yeah. I do a lot of work with construction companies, and I've gotten to talk with a lot of the people that are out in the field. And if you asked me to build something, I could probably do it, but I would really have to think about it. And then you talk to some of these guys, and they can see it in their head.
Yep.
And it's just so natural. And it's like, okay, you are clearly meant to be doing something with your hands and
Yep.
building something and constructing something, because
Yep.
that is just an ability I don't have. And it gives you such a profound respect for people that can just figure it out. They just see it in their head.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you can make some pretty good money. I think we're kind of off topic here maybe a little bit,
Yeah.
but you can make some pretty darn good money
Yeah.
by doing that stuff. And you can make it from, year after high school.
Yeah.
Rather than being in debt 4 years later
Right.
with something that doesn't really work that well.
Yeah, exactly.
How many, history majors do we need? Now, my son was a history major, so I can say that. But yeah, society doesn't need that many.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's something we can do to develop more self-awareness?
I personally, again, I'm touting this because I'm a big believer, and I'm not trying to sell the positive intelligence program, but it's made a huge difference in me because it's a dedicated effort to think about your own mind and your own mindset, and I think that helps for self-awareness in a pretty big way. People are oblivious sometimes, don't you think? I mean, they have an idea that they're being a good leader by coming in and barking some orders, and you there, do that, and if you do that again, you're out. And leadership done, good job. So I think that's important. I think reading is important, and I think, well, of course, here I sound like an advertisement here. I think gathering with other people who, one of the other great things about the Vistage group is they don't bat an eye to call each other out when they think that they're not being honest with themselves, and it's terrific for their own self-awareness. Well, I had no idea. They might even be offended at first. And we have a term called carefrontation, which is kind of corny in some ways, but it's on the money. I'm gonna wave a BS flag at you because I don't think you're being honest with yourself.
Yeah.
So that's good for self-awareness. So. Yeah, I don't really know for sure, I guess, but I think some of those kind of things, like a mindset. But there are many books and programs on that kind of thing. Is probably helpful. I admit these days that I'm a meditator.
Yeah.
Every morning I use the Calm app, and you can use other things or just sit still, I guess.
Sure.
But that to me is extremely helpful. I would have thought that a ton of hooey a few years ago.
Right.
But that's another sort of awareness thing that I picked up since I've been doing this work lately. And I think it's incredibly important to do some of those kind of things.
There's a book called The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but I'm not even finished with it. It's probably the most profound book I've read in a very long time, because one of the things he talks about is observing the thinker. So I am the observer of my own thinking.
Yes.
And so there's almost two different Taylors. There's the me that I project. There's the me that is, out here doing things in the world. And then there's the silent observer that's watching. And you start to pay attention to your own thinking. And you just start to learn so much about yourself, because it's so easy to you're just thinking. You're just thinking all the time. You're just doing all the time. And you realize just how quickly your mind is going.
Yep.
But meditation, it gives you this chance to step back from it and actually observe yourself thinking.
Yep.
And you start to realize different patterns, and you start to realize just how often you're lost in thought. And instead of just being in this moment, instead of just being in this moment, Joe and I are having a conversation. It's like, okay, I'm thinking about what question I'm going to ask him next.
Right. And not listening very well.
Yeah.
Listening is a tremendous skill. It hasn't really come up here yet. I think everybody knows that. But, truly listening, it's something else that's helped me with lately. Why did I have to wait 60 years to learn all this stuff? No, what you're referring to, I think, is exactly the same sort of thing. It's, there's nothing's real but now. And people spend an inordinate amount of time worrying about what may or may not happen in the future, or fretting about what's happened in the past that they can't change.
Yeah.
I mean, it's ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah.
And yet you can bound up. You can wake up at night worrying about that stuff. And that's the whole point of the meditation kind of practice. And that positive intelligence thing is rooted a lot in the meditation of being able to stay in the now, keep coming back to the now. Your mind, you're soft. It frets. It worries about things, thinks about other things, dreams about other things. And you just keep learning to keep coming back. It's just an exercise. It's a skill.
What's a question that you wish people would ask you more often?
That's a good one.
It's kind of a question about a question.
Yeah. Self-servingly, I get rid of this isolated feeling I feel when I'm running a company? Yeah, I suppose it really would be, something like ask me what I'm unwilling to ask myself. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you can tell when you one-on-one with some of the members, for example, when you really find the thing that's the question they really want to ask themselves. They know it, but they're just not realizing it. Somebody was talking about at the retreat, one of the members was going, I have this owner that I work with. I'm a co-founder. And I really, I'm worried that if I ask the question about what I want to ask about, she's going to say, well, the heck with you then, just go, Yet I'm so invaluable, and I asked the question, I think came up, or somebody else did, I guess, and said, well, what are you afraid? What are you afraid she's going to say? If you called her bluff, what would happen? And a woman sat back and thought, I guess that's really what I'm afraid of. That's really it, and you can just see the wheels turning, so there's that wonderful time where you can ask exactly the right question. Almost never in the work that I do now is there a time when I say, oh, I know what you got to do. You just need to do this. Here you go. Here's a book about it. What's the next thing? No, it's not. It's all, and you read this, if you look at any coaching program or any certification like that, they say it's really the art of asking questions, because usually people know the right answer. They just haven't uncovered it, or they're afraid to uncover it, or they're afraid of what it's going to mean to them, what's going to sort of push them to do that's uncomfortable. I'm way off the original question. What would people want to ask? What would I want people to ask me? Yeah. What's the question that I'm unwilling to ask myself, I guess. I say that just because to me, that's the most satisfying part of this work, whether I do it myself in a one-on-one or whether one of the other group members does it. And it's, you get, Vistage has this metaphor of an iceberg. And the members love to sort of water ski around the top. They like to talk about what's happening, who's not doing something, who's disagreeing with someone else, my bad numbers or my great numbers, whatever the case may be. And rarely is the right answer available up there somewhere. You really have to push them down to where you get after what they're doing, how they're contributing to it themselves, how they're being, that's resulting in what they're doing, that is resulting in what they have. Or even some deeply held beliefs, I'm afraid to spend money because we never had any when I was growing up. I mean, not that every answer has to be, rooted in some horrible childhood experience or something, but, and then the metaphor continues that really the correct answer is on the neighboring iceberg, the different half, but you can't go from the top to the top. You have to get down, to one of those lower levels, deeper levels of personal introspection to be able to make the crossover to the other iceberg to get the have you want.
Yeah. One of the things I've learned about myself recently is just my scarcity mindset. I have this mindset of, we're not going to have enough. And so we go to Costco and we buy, 50 cans of beans because what if there's a big earthquake? We don't have the beans that we need. And it's always good to have more on hand. And when I was 12 or 13, it was just a rough period for my family financially. And so my mom and I and my brother would go to get bread from Gleaners, then they'd give you the bread that didn't sell that previous day. And that was kind of baked into me. And so when I started running the business or started, my finances, we have this big emergency fund, but it can always be bigger. We can always have more emergency fund. And I started to talk to my dad about it, and he said, oh, I didn't realize it until you pointed it out, but I have scarcity mindset too. And your grandfather, he had scarcity mindset as well because he grew up in the Depression. And you realize, wow, okay, this is like a 3-generational thing that has been passed down. And that's why I am the way I am.
You and I were the same. Yeah. We did a great exercise at one of the retreats last year, the year before, where we did it's kind of lifeline, you'd call it. And it was this, we had done one year where I said, okay, what shaped your life? What shaped you as a leader? Explain some things to the rest of the group. And that was very revealing, very deep, very emotional for a lot of people. And then we did kind of the other half of that. the following retreat. It's like, okay. And I think I went up and did a kind of example. I said, this is what I'm talking about. I know that if I'm lucky, if I live to be 2050 or to 2050, I'll be 92 years old.
Yeah.
And 2050 is not that far off. And it's just like, so, here's today, here's 2050, here's the decades in between. What do I know is going to happen in there? So well, I know my parents are going to pass somewhere, whether it's here or here, that's there. What are the things that I want to do before then? Well, I want to like to see my kids, have a chance to get married and see grand, just to, kind of line all that out. Simple enough thought process. Amazing the emotions that came from that, and the self-awareness that I think people found amazing value in, and each other's ideas about, it's like, ooh, I never thought about that. That's really important to me.
Yeah.
Absolutely fabulous.
So that's a perfect lead into my last question for you.
Go ahead.
How would you like to be remembered?
I'd like to be remembered as a kind human who made a difference. And left a legacy of smart young people. I'm very proud of my 3 kids, and I think that they are smart, kind humans. I think it's the most important thing, in the end. I mean, I worry about scarcity, like we talked about. I worry about how much money do I really need. I watch what we paid for my dad when he had Alzheimer's, in his home. It's like, oh my God, let's see, if I needed that, how I needed that. And when the kids had a problem, we don't have enough, that can make you kind of crazy. But in the end, what's left over, I don't know, doesn't matter that much. How much can you indulge yourself, go on vacation and eat yourself silly or something, it's just, that's not what life's about.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's really what it's about to me. Probably not unlike just about every other human. If you push them to it, what's meaningful to you on the way out. That's it. There's one other thing too, the back surgery I told you I got, it may have been misguided. I don't know, but I was dealing with a very painful back, and I looked at a lot of those things I thought I wanted to do. And it's like, I got to try and do something about that. I got to get in better shape. I got to start taking better care of myself. I got to try and address this issue, or I won't be able to do these 4 things that I lined out that are incredibly important to me. So, yeah.
Joe Kuzmick, thank you.
Thanks. My pleasure, Taylor. Real pleasure to chat with you. I wish I had half the wisdom that you have now when I was your age.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, that would have been great.